Tim Heaphy, I want to start with you and the televised nature of the proceedings in Georgia. Your committee was impactful, made history for many, many reasons. One of them was the televised nature of the presentation of the evidence developed. Your thoughts about this court order to televise these hearings and these proceedings?
Yeah, Nicole, I think it's a really big deal because even though it's going to be the same facts that America has heard repeatedly from the Select Committee, from very aggressive reporting by a lot of really good journalists, there's a chance that the same facts will resonate more when they are presented in a different forum, right? I think there are people out there in this country that don't trust Congress because it's politicized. They don't trust the media. They might trust a criminal proceeding where that same evidence is tested by vigorous advocacy on behalf of the former president and his co-conspirators. So if America can see the same evidence play out in that forum, I think, maybe naively, but legitimately, it has a chance to resonate and connect and change minds in a way that maybe some of the other presentations of that evidence did not succeed.
Well, I mean, Tim, I agree with you. And I actually think Donald Trump, in his sort of primal reptilian survival compass, knows and agrees with this assessment as well. It makes it impossible to really spoon feed the lie that there's some deep state liberal conspiracy when all of the storytellers, all the narrators didn't just vote for Trump. They worked for Trump, and they were willing to do just about anything, not just to help him win, but to help him cheat. I mean, what do you make of what the district attorney there has assembled in terms of the evidence she's developed and the story she'll tell in a trial?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. When this evidence plays out on television in a courtroom in Atlanta, it'll be Bill Barr and Pat Cipollone and Mike Pence, people that worked very hard for the president, that wanted him to win. It will be very hard for him to credibly make the narrative that this is all a witch hunt, that this is all manufactured, that this is all politically motivated, when the people speaking, the people providing the evidence on which that case is based are all close allies of his. I think it underscores his strategy here, which, as Barb McQuaid has said repeatedly on your show and others, is a political strategy, not a legal one, right? His defense here is one of public relations, an attempt to stall until he potentially is reelected as president. It is not a legal defense because it will be very difficult for him to mount a credible legal defense.
Well, I mean, Tim, one more question, and I want to bring the others in. I mean, even the strategy of severing his case from the others, the evidence is the same. They are charged as a criminal conspiracy, a criminal enterprise. They're all charged with, by and large, the same stuff. The evidence that she developed to charge Trump is the same evidence. They're the same Republican witnesses that would be put on the stand to testify against those who are exercising their right to a speedy trial. So even in the court of public opinion, which I think we all agree is where Trump, the only arena in which he's at this point playing, that will not be helpful for him to see his co-conspirators on trial on TV.
Exactly right, Nicole. Look, some defendants can argue that some of the evidence presented more broadly in that indictment doesn't apply to them, and it shouldn't be presented at their trial. Donald Trump can't say that, right? He's the leader of this conspiracy, and every single other act in that indictment is going to be ascribed to him, his knowledge of it, his affirmative support of it, with very few exceptions. So a trial against Kenneth Chesebro, a trial against Sidney Powell will involve evidence about the former president's awareness of, leadership of that conspiracy. So it is bad for him in the court of public opinion. The more this story is told, the more this evidence plays out, it's got to be unfavorable to him, both legally and politically.
So, Donnie, you know this sort of, I described it as a reptilian survival instinct. If you have a different description, I'm sure it's better and more on the mark. But Donald Trump never learned any elements of how to be a public servant, but he brought with him to the presidency everything he learned from being a reality TV figure. And he does understand that bad information, evidence that makes him look bad, not just to his base, because I think we can all agree they're locked in, but to the kinds of people he would need to vote for him if he wanted to be president again and pardon himself for all of these alleged crimes. This is terrible for him. What do you make of how this is shaping up? A televised speedy trial for defendants charged with the very same crimes Trump is.
It's ironic you mentioned the word reality. This is a guy that, I don't want to say came to power, but his final push to power was a reality show, The Apprentice, and now his demise will be a reality show also, as we kind of see it, as Tim pointed out. Not folks from the DNC coming up there, not Democrats coming up there, his hand-picked people doing his dirty work. And, you know, we still are a culture that is a visual culture, is a video culture, is people don't read as much as we'd like to think in this country. And there's something when there's flesh and blood and we hear the words and we see the faces that hits in the gut in a way that a transcript does not. But as I said earlier, I think there's a tremendous irony here to a guy who came in on reality TV and will be going out on reality TV.
What do you agree with all of the, it's so interesting. Harry Litman said this yesterday, Donnie, and I really felt the truth of it after I got off the air, that for 8 years, non-lawyers have struggled to understand all the ins and outs of the legal process. And what he said on our air yesterday is that now lawyers are having to sort of Google and look at the political calendar to understand where these different milestones in a criminal proceeding will fall in a political calendar. It really is for Trump the intersection of two things that other than his locked-in base, which is not enough to elect him president of the United States of America, none of the other elements, not the public relations piece with the televised state trial of his co-conspirators, not any of the milestones in the criminal or civil suits against him, and not the fact that he's got two Republican challengers who are making a point, making a case about his alleged criminality. None of those things aid him with what he needs to do politically at this moment.
Well, to that point, the word control. And one thing Donald Trump has always been addicted to and has always had is control. And as we see the calendar unfold and as we see the indictments unfold and as we see, as you said, the cross-section of the politics and the legal framing, you realize, just picture him now, how out of control he must feel, how under siege he must feel. You know, we live this every day. And there's a guy who's actually going through this and living this. And as each one of these dominoes continues to fall, and whether it's just the news of them televising, you know, the first of these trials, you realize how out of control this gentleman is for the first time in his life. He has no control of this. And for a guy that has been in complete control, it's got to be incredibly, incredibly overwhelming and anxiety driving.
I think that's interesting. We don't get a lot of windows into what that must be like, but I think you're right. And to the degree that it fuels his conduct, and to the degree that his conduct and his speech fuel the threat of violence and the threats of extremism, it's an important insight. Glenn, let me bring you in on the legal developments. Both Trump's waiving of his right to an arraignment, if I said that right, as well as his move to sever his case, and the judge's order that the case be televised.
Yeah, I am glad the Georgia case will be televised. I have to say, Nicole, I really hope there is a groundswell for the federal cases to be televised, especially the January 6th case in D.C. I actually think there's a pretty robust legal argument that they should be televised, and that is because count 4 in the indictment, a conspiracy to deprive the voters of our voting rights. Courts have said when that kind of a charge is brought, the American voters are the victims. The Crime Victims' Rights Act is a federal law. It provides rights to crime victims, including the right not to be excluded from the courtroom. I think the American people, the voters, the victims have a right not to be excluded from the trial, and the only way to implement that legal right is to have cameras in the courtroom. I think that's a viable legal argument, might be a slightly better atmospheric argument than legal. But here's the other dynamic at play, Nicole. If cameras are not allowed in the federal courtroom, you're going to have Donald Trump's team of lawyers step to the cameras at the end of every trial day and misrepresent what went on in there. They're going to say, ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe it. The prosecution's evidence fell apart. They're being exposed every day as, running a witch hunt or political interference. And Jack Smith's team of federal prosecutors will say exactly nothing to the cameras at the end of every day. That's not a fair fight in the court of public opinion. But the way to level that playing field is to put cameras in the federal courtroom. And I'm thrilled that they're going to be in the Georgia courtroom as well.